Benjamin was standing in the middle of the receiving area when the chief physician slammed a newspaper down on his desk with the headline, "Killer Surgeon." And before we go on, friends, write where you're from and what you're doing right now. It's interesting to see how far our stories travel. Killer Surgeon. Congressman's son dies on the operating table, the headline screamed. Below it was a photo, his photo, the same one from the hospital's honor board, only now framed in black, as if he were the one who had died, not Nathan Caldwell, a 30-year-old heir to a congressman's fortune, brought in with a ruptured aorta after crashing his Porsche. Do you understand what's going to happen now? Simon didn't even try to hide his fear. His hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. Caldwell Sr. has already called the health department. Reporters are at the entrance. Do you know who his lawyer is? Do you even understand? Benjamin understood. He had operated all night, 6 hours fighting for a life that kept slipping away with the blood. The aorta was torn in 3 places, broken ribs had punctured a lung, and it was already a miracle the man had made it to the operating room at all. But miracles didn't happen. And now, Caldwell Sr., a man half the city was afraid of, wanted someone to blame. Benjamin went home through the back exit, through the laundry room, past stunned orderlies who watched him with that special kind of pity people save for the doomed. A van with tinted windows was waiting by his building. Reporters, he guessed, spotting a camera lens sticking out of a window. He had to cut through the neighboring yard, climb over a playground fence, feeling like a criminal in his own city. Alice met him in the hallway, clutching her stuffed bunny. His daughter sensed something was wrong. Children always do. "Daddy, why are you sad?" She was 6, and she believed her dad could do anything. Fix broken toys, make cocoa with foam, save people's lives. How do you explain to a child that sometimes you can't save someone, and for that, they can destroy you? He crouched down, hugged her, breathed in the smell of her kid's shampoo. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just going on a little trip, out of town, to your great-grandfather's place. Remember? I told you about it?" She remembered. He had told her so many times about the house in the woods where he spent every summer as a child, about the river behind the garden, about the attic stuffed with old books and suitcases full of mysteries. He talked about it, but he himself hadn't been there in 15 years, since his grandfather died, and then his grandmother 3 years later. The house stood empty, far away, almost unreal, existing only in memories, like a bedtime story. His mother-in-law called an hour later. "Benjamin, have you lost your mind? Lucy just called me. She says you were on the news. What is going on?" Margaret spoke in that special tone mothers-in-law use when they really mean, "I knew you'd ruin her life." She had disliked him from the start. A surgeon with no connections, a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, no real prospects. That Helen had chosen him herself, that they were happy until illness took her 3 years ago. Margaret preferred not to remember that. Only the accusations remained. "I'm taking Alice to stay with me," she snapped, not letting him finish. "You're in no state to look after a child right now." He wanted to argue, but the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he saw 2 police officers, and everything inside him went cold. The investigators had arrived faster than he expected. "I'll call you back," he said to his mother-in-law and hung up. He opened the door. They showed their badges, asked him to come in for questioning, assured him it was just a formality. Benjamin knew how those formalities worked. When someone with money and power got involved, formalities turned into charges, statements into verdicts, and life into ruins. They kept him at the station until morning. The investigator, young, diligent, with a brand new tablet and ambition shining in his eyes, kept asking the same questions over and over. "Why didn't you call a consultation? Why didn't you transfer him to the central clinic? Why didn't you contact the family before the surgery?" Benjamin explained. There was no time. Every minute mattered. The patient arrived unconscious, with no documents, and only later, when it was all over, did they find out who had been on his table. The investigator took notes, nodded, then went back to the beginning again. When they finally let him go, it was already dawn. On a travel ban, of course. "Wait," the investigator called after him at the door. "You do understand, this is only the beginning. Caldwell hired 3 lawyers. One of them is a former state prosecutor. Do you have money for a defense?" It was almost a human moment, almost sympathy, and Benjamin understood. The guy was warning him there were no real chances. He stepped outside, and his phone immediately came alive. 23 missed calls from colleagues, 8 from his mother-in-law, 4 from unknown numbers. A voicemail. "We know where you live, killer." A man's voice, rough and angry. Benjamin listened and felt something inside him turn to stone. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. He couldn't protect himself from the machine Caldwell had set in motion. But he could protect Alice. He came home as a neighbor was walking her little lapdog. She looked at him strangely, almost guiltily, and quickly looked away. That was it. That's how easily you become an outcast. Benjamin went up to the apartment, pulled an old backpack out of the closet, and started packing. Alice was sitting in the kitchen with the nanny, elderly Claudia, who sometimes helped with the child. "Benjamin," Claudia whispered, pulling him into the hallway. "Some people came this morning. From television, they said. They wanted to film Alice, can you imagine? Of course I chased them away, but—" She didn't finish, but he understood. The reporters had reached his daughter. That meant it was over. He called his mother-in-law. "Alice is coming with me. Don't argue. I'm her father." Margaret shouted about court, about taking away his parental rights, about him being selfish and ruining the girl just like he ruined her daughter. Benjamin stayed silent until she ran out of breath. "I'll call when we're settled," he said, and hung up. Then he turned his phone off completely. The car, an old Toyota he had bought back when Helen was still alive, started on the 3rd try. Alice sat in the back seat, hugging her bunny and a small backpack with her favorite things: a drawing pad, colored pencils, a Winnie the Pooh book, a little doll in a blue dress. She didn't complain, didn't ask where they were going or why they were in such a hurry. She just looked out the window, serious and focused, as if she understood something important. Benjamin drove out of the yard and turned onto the bypass road. The city began to fall away. First the residential blocks, then the industrial zones, then emptiness, fields and thin strips of forest, rare villages, cows by the roadside. He was heading north, into the back of nowhere, a place the Caldwell lawyers and TV crews hadn't reached yet. 6 hours on the road, if there were no traffic jams. He had forgotten how far it was, the grandfather's house. How long you had to drive for the world to become different. Alice fell asleep about 2 hours in, and only then did he finally breathe out. Forest stretched along the road. At first, sparse birch trees, then thicker, darker woods with spruce and pine. That sharp pine scent that somehow seeped in even through closed windows. He remembered Grandma Pauline, who baked pies with meat and apples at the same time, so the whole house smelled both hearty and sweet. Grandpa Michael, quiet, stern, with huge carpenter's hands that could make anything, from a chair to a boat. The Blackwater River, cold even in July, with sandy banks and crayfish hiding under driftwood. The attic where treasures were kept. A gramophone, a chest full of old magazines, an icon, old letters he never read. All of it existed somewhere back there, in the past, in a childhood that now felt like a foreign country. He hadn't been here in 15 years. The house had to be falling apart. A leaking roof, a rotten porch, weeds up to his waist. He prepared himself for the worst, for ruins, for clearing debris, sleeping in the car, fighting wild neglect. He didn't care, as long as it was far away, as long as Alice was safe. The navigator lost signal when they turned off the highway onto a dirt road. Benjamin drove by memory, past an abandoned farm, over the bridge across Blackwater, then right, uphill, along a track overgrown with grass. Nothing had changed, and that was strange. The same birches along the road, the same hill, the same crooked pine on the bend, the one he had called the witch when he was a kid. Alice woke up and stared around, wide-eyed. "Daddy, are we in a fairy tale?" He didn't answer because he saw the house and forgot how to breathe. The house was standing. Not just standing, alive. The roof he expected to see collapsed was new, dark green. The window frames were freshly painted the same blue Grandma used every summer. The fence stood straight, not a single crooked plank. There was no wild grass in the yard, only neat garden beds and a couple of apple trees. A striped rug lay on the porch, the very one Grandma had knitted, or exactly like it. Benjamin got out of the car and stood there, unable to take a step. It was impossible. The house had been empty for 15 years. No one took care of it. He knew that for a fact. 3 years ago, he had even called the local administration, asking about taxes. They told him the house was still standing but needed major repairs. Who did this? Why? How? Alice climbed out of the car, walked up to him, and took his hand. "Daddy, is this our house? It's beautiful." He nodded, still unable to find words, and they walked up to the porch. The steps didn't creak. The door was closed, but not locked, just hooked from the outside. He pushed it open and went in. Inside, it smelled of dried herbs, wood, and something deeply familiar. The way it smelled in childhood, when he woke up on a summer morning, Grandma already busy in the kitchen, sunlight lying across the floor in slanted stripes. Everything was clean, washed. Curtains hung on the windows, white, with tiny flowers, as if freshly laundered. A vase with dry wildflowers stood on the table, and even that felt touching rather than sad. The stove was intact, the bed made in the room, firewood neatly stacked in the entryway. He walked from room to room like in a dream. Alice ran after him, touching everything, the embroidered towels, the old cuckoo clock that, strangely enough, was ticking, the big chest in the corner. "Daddy, does someone live here?" It was the right question. Someone clearly did. Or at least, someone took care of the place. In the kitchen, he found a note. It lay on the table, held down by a chicken-shaped salt shaker, the same one he remembered from childhood. "Benjamin, if you're reading this, it means you made it. Thank God. The house is ready. The cellar key is on a nail by the door. There are potatoes, jars, everything you need. If you need me, I'm 3 houses down, the 3rd from the store. Dorothy." He read it 3 times. Dorothy. The name meant nothing to him. He didn't remember any Dorothy, but whoever she was, she had been waiting for him. She knew he would come. She prepared the house. How? Why? He sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. Alice came up and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Daddy, don't be sad. It's nice here, and it smells good." He laughed. For the first time in these 2 insane days, he laughed. She was right. It was nice here. And no matter what was happening in the world, no matter how dark the clouds gathering over his head, here, in this house, in this forgotten corner of the country, he could simply breathe. Evening came quickly, as it always does in the countryside in autumn. Benjamin found everything in the cellar just as the note promised. Firewood lay in the entryway, dry and ready. He lit the stove. His hands remembered the motions on their own, as if he had done it yesterday, not 20 years ago. Alice sat nearby, watching the fire with wide eyes. "Daddy, why doesn't Aunt Dorothy have a TV or the internet?" He smiled. There was no signal here at all. His phone showed 0 bars, and right now it felt like a blessing. No calls, no messages, no headlines with his face. He fried potatoes in an old cast-iron pan, opened a jar of pickles, sliced bread, dark, homemade, still fresh, found in the bread box. They ate dinner by the light of a kerosene lamp, and it felt like an adventure. "Like in an old movie," Alice said, and he agreed, like in a movie. Except this was his life, which had suddenly turned 180 degrees and brought him here, to this house that, it turned out, had been waiting for him all these years. After putting Alice to bed on Grandma's wide old bed, he stepped out onto the porch. The sky was unlike anything you see in the city, black, deep, packed with stars so dense it looked like someone had spilled salt across dark fabric. The air smelled of chimney smoke, fallen leaves, the river. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, then fell silent. The quiet was so thick he could hear his own heartbeat. He thought about what would come next, about the investigation going on without him, about Caldwell, who wouldn't stop, about his mother-in-law, who had probably already filed something against him, about a career that had ended the night Nathan Caldwell got drunk, got behind the wheel of his Porsche, and slammed into a pole at 100 miles an hour. He should have been thinking about that, making plans, looking for lawyers, building a defense. But here, under these stars, it all felt distant and unreal, as if he had fallen out of that world and into another one, where time moved differently and other rules applied. Tomorrow, he would go see this Dorothy, find out how she knew he would come, how she prepared the house, who she even was. But for now, sleep. For the first time in 2 days, he felt like he actually could. The morning began with a rooster. Benjamin jolted upright in bed, not immediately understanding where he was or why something alive was screaming so loudly right under the window. Then he remembered. The village. Roosters. Alice was already awake, sitting by the window and watching outside. "Daddy, there are chickens walking around, right in the yard, and some lady is coming this way." He looked out. A woman around 60 was walking up the path to the house, solid, sturdy, wearing a colorful headscarf and a padded jacket. She was carrying a basket covered with a towel. He barely had time to pull on his jeans and shirt when she was already knocking. "Open up, Benjamin. Why are you standing there like a stranger?" Her voice was loud and commanding. He opened the door. "I'm Dorothy." She looked him over, nodded with satisfaction. "Well, thank God. You've grown up. You look like your grandpa. Michael would be pleased. Here, take this." She shoved the basket into his hands. "Eggs, milk, cottage cheese. The child needs it. What's her name?" Alice peeked out from behind his back. "Alice, my name is Alice. And you're Miss Dorothy?" Dorothy squatted down and looked her straight in the eyes. "Just Dorothy is fine. Or Grandma Dorothy, if you want. You must be hungry. Let's go to the kitchen. I'll feed you properly. Men can't cook, everyone knows that." She took over the kitchen like it was her own house. Maybe, in a way, it was. While she fried eggs with tomatoes, sliced bread, and poured milk into enamel mugs, Benjamin watched her, trying to understand where she had come from, who she was, why she had taken care of the house all these years. Finally, he asked. She sat across from him, folded her hands on the table, large, work-worn hands with thick veins. "I promised your Grandma Pauline," she said, "back when she was sick. She told me, 'Dorothy, if Benjamin ever comes back, make sure the house is ready. Don't let him think he was abandoned.' So I watched it. Every spring, every fall. Fixed things little by little. Had the roof redone last year, hired some men, paid out of my own pocket. You'll pay me back later. Don't rush." She waved off his attempt to interrupt. "I knew you'd come. Houses feel these things. It was waiting for you." Benjamin was silent. Something rose in his throat. Not words, something bigger. This woman, almost a stranger to him, had protected his home for 15 years, keeping a promise made to his grandmother. In a world where congressmen crushed the innocent and journalists hunted 6-year-old children, Dorothy existed, and it felt like a miracle. "I'll pay you back," he finally said. "Every cent." She snorted. "Where will you go?" "But not right away. First, get yourself together. I can see it. You didn't just show up here for no reason, almost in the middle of the night, with barely any things. What happened?" He didn't want to talk, but somehow, he told her everything. From the very beginning. The surgery, the death, Caldwell, the reporters, the investigation, the travel ban he had just broken, the threatening voicemail, his mother-in-law and her threats, running away in the middle of the night. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. Alice ate her eggs and drew in her sketchbook, not really paying attention to the adult conversation. When he finished, Dorothy stayed quiet for a long time. Then she stood up, went to the window, and looked out into the yard. "All right then," she said in the same commanding tone. "No one will find you here. Our village, Maplewood, is on the map, but the navigator doesn't see it. Internet only works on the hill behind the cemetery, and even then, only if the wind's from the west. Our sheriff George comes by once a month, if that. You keep your head down, raise the child, and we'll see what happens. Truth is a funny thing. It floats up on its own. The main thing is, don't rush it, and don't push." Life in Maplewood began to flow differently, not like in the city, jagged, nervous, broken into minutes. Time here was different, thick and slow, like the honey Dorothy brought them on the third day from her own beehives. "I keep 3 hives. It's enough," she said. Benjamin woke up with the roosters, and little by little it stopped feeling like punishment. He lit the stove, cooked porridge, awkwardly at first, then better and better. Alice ran around the yard, getting to know the chickens, which turned out to belong to the neighbors, but liked wandering onto their land because, as Dorothy said, there were more worms here, and the owner wasn't mean. They walked down to the river. Black water still flowed behind the gardens, and Alice squealed with delight when she saw the ducks. They gathered the last apples in the orchard, sour, green ones, good for jam. They fixed the fence. One section had leaned over during the winter. Benjamin remembered how his grandfather taught him to hold a hammer, and his hands remembered on their own. The neighbors were cautious, but friendly. At first they came by under different excuses, asking for salt, offering help. They looked him over like a curiosity. "Michael's grandson? Imagine that. We thought he'd never come back." A city boy, after all. He didn't take offense. He understood. To them, he was an outsider, someone from a world of skyscrapers, traffic jams, and people staring into their phones. But slowly, they warmed up. Old William, who lived 2 houses down, brought fish. He fished in Blackwater every day and always caught more than he could eat. Olivia from across the street brought a jar of jam, gooseberry, with some secret of her own that made it tart instead of overly sweet. Alice ate it straight from the jar with a spoon. Theodore, a gloomy man around 45 who turned out to be the local electrician, came to fix the wiring. Dorothy says something sparking, "Don't want a fire." Benjamin tried to pay him, but Theodore just gave him a heavy look. "I don't take money for work. We'll settle later. Can you build me a fence when you've got time? I'm short on hands." Alice was blossoming. He saw it every day, her cheeks pink from the fresh air, her eyes bright, the way she ran without getting tired, how she laughed chasing chickens, how seriously she asked Dorothy if she was allowed to pet the goat. Dorothy had a goat, Betty, mean-tempered, but fond of children. In the city, Alice had been quiet, homebound, often sick, runny nose, cough, something else all the time. The pediatrician would just shrug, probably allergies, pollution, try a humidifier. Here, she didn't get sick once. She ran barefoot in the grass, even though it was already October. At first, Benjamin was afraid, then he stopped worrying. "Kids should run barefoot," Dorothy said with authority. "Makes them tougher. Nobody gets sick around here." That was an exaggeration, of course, but also partly true. People here lived more simply, rougher, but healthier too. Maybe because they breathed this air, ate this food, lived by a rhythm set by nature, not by schedules. Another life remained in the city. He tried not to think about it, but sometimes, especially at night, it crept into his thoughts and kept him awake. What was happening there? What were the newspapers writing? What was Caldwell doing? Were they looking for him? Signal only appeared on that hill behind the cemetery, and he didn't go there. He didn't want to know. Maybe he was afraid. As long as he was here, in this place outside of time, there was still a chance to fix things, to believe the truth would surface, like Dorothy said, that someone would figure it out, that he wouldn't be turned into a scapegoat. But the moment he turned on his phone and saw the headlines, that belief would shatter, so he didn't turn it on. In the second week, Alice made a friend. His name was Tommy, a boy about 7, Olivia's grandson. He had come to stay with his grandmother for the holidays and ended up staying longer because his mother worked double shifts and had no one else to leave him with. Tommy was quick and scruffy, with permanently scraped knees and pockets full of junk, pebbles, shells, rusty nuts, and bolts. He showed Alice how to catch frogs, how to build a shelter out of branches, how to find mushrooms in the forest. They raced around the village together, and Benjamin watched them from the porch, feeling something warm spread through his chest. This is how it should be. This is how childhood should look. Not TV, not tablets, not endless development classes. Frogs, shelters, mushrooms, a friend to run with until dark. At the end of October, the first snow fell. Light, unserious, melted by noon. But Alice was thrilled. She built a tiny snowman, barely enough snow for a head and a fist-sized body, and solemnly placed it on the porch. Let him guard the house until he grows up. The snowman melted an hour later, of course, but she wasn't upset. He'll come back, when the snow is real. That evening, they sat by the stove, and Benjamin told her about his grandfather, how he built a boat, how he went hunting bears, how once he saved the whole village from a fire by flooding a dam on the stream. He didn't know anymore what was true and what was legend, how the stories had tangled in his memory, grown details, turned into something bigger than facts. But Alice listened, wide-eyed, and he understood. That was what mattered. Not truth or fiction, but that it had existed. There was a family, there was a grandfather, there was a house, there were roots. She wasn't floating in emptiness. The cat showed up in early November, ginger, battered, with a torn ear and a bold stare. He came out of nowhere, just sat on the porch one morning and yelled for food. Alice brought him milk, he lapped it up and stayed. Dorothy said it was Rusty, a local drifter who wandered from house to house and never stayed long anywhere. Means he liked it here. Good sign. Rusty doesn't choose bad places. The cat settled in, slept on the stove, followed Alice around like a dog, and hunted at night in the shed, where mouse squeaks could sometimes be heard. Benjamin had never liked cats. No point. Fur everywhere. Half his friends were allergic. But he liked this ginger troublemaker. There was something right about him. Honest. He came because he wanted to. Stayed because it felt good. No conditions. No bargaining. One evening, Dorothy came not with food, but with a conversation. She sat down by the stove, refused tea, stayed quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Here's the thing, Benjamin. You're hiding here, I get that. No one's judging you. But life doesn't wait. Back in your city, things are happening, and you don't know about them. Maybe something good, maybe something bad. But you don't know. And not knowing is worse than fear. At least fear makes sense." He was silent. She was right, and he knew it. You couldn't hide forever. You couldn't live without knowing. Somewhere out there were investigators, lawyers, Caldwell, his mother-in-law. Somewhere out there, they might be looking for him. Maybe he'd been declared wanted, or maybe they'd dropped it. Or maybe they'd found the real truth and cleared him. He didn't know. and that not knowing really was worse than fear. "I'll go up the hill tomorrow," he said. Dorothy nodded. "Go. Leave Alice with me. I'll feed her, watch her. She wanted to see Betty, remember? I promised." The hill behind the cemetery wasn't really a mountain, just a higher rise, with a view of the whole village, the river, and the forest stretching to the horizon. The cemetery was old and quiet, with wooden crosses and wrought iron fences. Benjamin found his grandparents' graves, well kept, with fresh flowers. Dorothy had been taking care of this too. He stood there for a while, silent, said something to himself. Not a prayer, just words. Then he climbed to the top and turned on his phone. The signal didn't appear right away. 2 shaky bars, unstable. The phone buzzed, beeped, vibrated, swallowing everything that had piled up over 3 weeks. Messages, missed calls, notifications. He opened the news, and the world grew heavy again. The headlines were the same. Killer surgeon. Investigation ongoing. Congressman's son dies on the operating table. Not a word about Caldwell. Not a hint that anything was changing. His photo stared back from the screen again. A tired face, shot somewhere near the hospital entrance, with a caption that made his teeth clench. Benjamin scrolled to the very end, as if hoping the truth would appear on its own if he just kept going. But the feed ended. The truth didn't. The phone vibrated unexpectedly in his hand. An unknown number. He wanted to reject it. Almost did. But something, not intuition, not fear, but cold clarity, stopped his finger. "Yes," he said. The pause on the other end was short, businesslike. "Finally. I was starting to think you weren't answering, Doctor." The voice was calm, even polite, the kind of voice used by people who were used to getting their way. Benjamin sat down right on the ground. The stones were cold and damp. "You know who I am," the voice continued, "and you know why I'm calling." He did. "You have a beautiful daughter," Caldwell said, as casually as if talking about the weather. "And such a quiet place you've chosen. Good people there, simple people. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Because of you." Benjamin was silent. The air suddenly felt thick, like before a storm. "I'm offering a simple solution," Caldwell went on. "You come back, sign the papers, admit your mistakes. I close the matter. You serve your time quietly, without noise. Your daughter grows up. Everyone stays alive, or you decide to play the hero. And then, I'm afraid the consequences will be broader than you'd like." "When?" Benjamin asked. "Today. The address will be sent to you." The line went dead. He sat on the hill for a long time, staring at the dark screen. Everything was simple now. Not easier, just simple. They were taking away his choice, but leaving him the responsibility. Below lay the village. Smoke from chimneys, a dog barking, children laughing, Alice probably running around at Dorothy's place. He stood up and walked down. At home, he told Dorothy everything, without choosing words, without sparing himself or her. Dorothy listened in silence, didn't interrupt. Only at the end did she say, "All right then, you'll go, but not empty-handed. You have to fight. Get him talking. Maybe it'll work." She pulled an old voice recorder from a drawer, heavy, with a scratched casing. "He likes to talk. Men like that always do. Let him talk." "I'll sign the papers," Benjamin said. "That's what he wants." "You'll sign," she nodded, "and then we'll see who wins." He went to Alice before leaving. She was asleep, hugging her bunny, breathing evenly. He stood in the doorway longer than usual, memorizing, not even her face, but life itself, exactly as it was. The road to the city was empty. He drove slowly, not because he was afraid, but because there was nowhere to rush. Somewhere between the turns, a clear thought came to him. He would come back different, or he wouldn't come back at all. He arrived early. He always arrived early. It was a surgeon's habit. The building was plain, an ordinary office block with no signs. There were thousands like it in the city. No security at the entrance, just a glass door and a guard behind a desk who didn't even look up when Benjamin gave his name. "You're expected." The elevator took him to the 7th floor. The hallway was empty, smelled of coffee and office supplies. He walked slowly, feeling the cold edge of the recorder in his pocket under his fingers. The office was large and bare. No photos, no personal items, just a desk, a few chairs, and a panoramic window. The city below looked like a toy. Caldwell was sitting behind the desk, not getting up. He looked at Benjamin closely, almost with curiosity, the way you look at someone who has already been sentenced, but you haven't decided how yet. "Sit down," he said. "I don't like people standing. It creates an illusion of equality." Benjamin sat. The recorder in his pocket was on. He felt it as clearly as if it were part of his body. "You know why you're here," Caldwell continued. "So let's skip the theater." "Your son was in critical condition," Benjamin said. "We did everything we could." Caldwell's face twitched, for the first time, briefly. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't tell me medical fairy tales. You're a doctor. You came up with those phrases yourself." He leaned forward. "My son went into the operating room alive and came out dead. That's enough. He had a ruptured aorta, multiple injuries. I don't care," Caldwell cut him off. "I don't care if he was drunk. I don't care what condition he was in. He was my son, and you didn't save him." Benjamin was silent. "You think I care about the truth?" Caldwell went on, calmer now. "Truth is for the weak, for those without resources. I have resources." He smirked. "And you're a convenient option. A surgeon with no political weight, no family that could fight for you, a single father. That's a gift." "You want me to go to prison," Benjamin said. "I want you to answer," Caldwell corrected. "How doesn't matter. Court, confession, expert opinions. We can assemble any picture we like." He leaned back in his chair. "I've already bought 2 experts. 3 more will agree once they understand who they're dealing with. One has already signed the right conclusion. The investigator isn't a hero either. They're all people. Everyone needs money, or safety." Benjamin looked up. "You're saying this out loud?" "Of course," Caldwell replied calmly. "Why would I be afraid?" He smiled. "Do you really think anyone will investigate my methods because of you?" He placed a folder in front of Benjamin. "Sign. You admit to medical error. Quietly. No press. You get a sentence, not the maximum. I'll even make sure the conditions are tolerable." "And if I refuse?" Caldwell tilted his head. "Then I'll have to be less careful." He looked out the window. "Your daughter. The woman hiding you. The neighbors. A small, quiet place where everyone knows each other. You understand how easy it is to create problems there. Inspections, accusations, accidents. You'll destroy innocent people," Benjamin said. "For justice," Caldwell replied. "My justice." Benjamin picked up the pen. His hand was steady, strangely steady. "You know this will put you in prison," he said. "For pressure, bribery, threats." Caldwell laughed softly. "Me?" He looked straight at him. "They don't put me in prison, doctor. They elect me." Benjamin signed. Once. No corrections. Caldwell took the folder away. "Good," he said. "You can go now. And don't do anything stupid. I'll know." Benjamin stood up and left. The door closed behind him softly, almost politely. Outside it was noisy. Cars, people, an ordinary day. The world hadn't collapsed, and that was the scariest part. Benjamin reached his car, got in, closed the door, and only then allowed himself to exhale. The recorder was still running. He didn't drive back to Maplewood. He drove into the city. The newspaper office was in an old building, with chipped tiles by the entrance. He sat in the waiting area until they let him in, gripping the recorder in his pocket like evidence and like a sentence at the same time. "How can we help you?" the journalist asked when he entered. Benjamin put the recorder on the table. "This is a recording," he said. "Of a conversation with a man who believes he's above the law." He looked her straight in the eyes. "If you publish this, my life is over. If you don't, more than just my life will be over." The journalist turned on the recording, and for the first time in a long while, Benjamin understood. Now he really had done everything he could. All that was left was to wait. He didn't check the news right away. First, he drove back to Maplewood, parked the car by the house, sat inside without getting out, listening to a dog barking somewhere and a neighbor's gate slamming. Dorothy met his gaze, asked nothing, just nodded. That was enough. He went to bed fully dressed, fell asleep almost instantly, woke up early, to silence. His phone lay next to him, turned off. He switched it on only by noon when he went up the hill for signal. The screen lit up, and notifications poured in one after another. Messages, missed calls, links. He opened the first one. The headline was dry, emotionless. Congressman Caldwell detained on charges of witness intimidation and expert bribery. Benjamin read slowly, line by line. FBI. Audio recording. Threats. Direct admissions. Pressure on the investigation. An attempt to fabricate a criminal case against a doctor. A separate paragraph about attempts to intimidate people living in rural areas. It was all there. His voice, calm, almost emotionless. And Caldwell's voice, confident, irritated, convinced of his own untouchability. The photo under the article was recent. Caldwell in a dark coat, his face twisted, standing between two agents. Unbroken, angry. A man like that doesn't feel remorse. A man like that simply isn't used to losing. The publication caused a huge reaction. By evening, federal authorities had stepped in. Too much had been said out loud on the recording. Too many powerful people were involved. Benjamin read to the end and put the phone down. There was no relief, only a strange feeling, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted from his chest, but the scars were still there. The phone rang. "Benjamin, thank God you picked up." Martha, the secretary, sounded shaken. "Have you seen it?" "I have." It's because of the recording," she exhaled. "Everything collapsed overnight. The experts made deals, the investigator gave testimony. All charges against you have been dropped, completely. The chief asked me to tell you he'd like to apologize in person." Benjamin looked into the distance. Alice was running around the yard with a stick, pretending it was a sword. "I'll call back," he said. A bit later. He hung up and went back into the house. Dorothy was standing by the stove, stirring something in a pot. "They got him?" she asked, without turning around. "They did." She nodded, as if they were talking about something ordinary. "Then you did everything right." Benjamin sat down at the table. For the first time in a long while, he felt tired. Real, honest tiredness, the kind you can live on after. "We need to go back to the city," he said. Dorothy turned, looked at him closely. "I know." He nodded. Words were unnecessary. Outside, Alice was laughing. The world kept going, quietly, stubbornly, no matter what. And somewhere far away, a man who believed himself above the law was sitting in a windowless room, understanding for the first time in his life that some words really do have consequences. He stayed in Maplewood for another week. Helped old William fix his boat. Several planks needed replacing. Stacked firewood for Dorothy. She brushed him off, said she could handle it herself, but he saw how much she appreciated the help. He drove to the town store for groceries, real store-bought ones, with milk in cartons and sliced bread. Alice treated the city bread with suspicion. "It's kind of fake. It doesn't smell." She was right. He felt it too. In the evenings, they sat by the stove, and Benjamin thought, maybe not go back. Maybe stay here, get a job at the local hospital. They probably needed surgeons, live in this house, raise Alice in this air, among these people. It would be an escape, he knew that. A beautiful, cozy escape. but still an escape. And he wasn't used to running away. He had operated for 6 hours trying to save a man who didn't want to live right. He hadn't given up when someone else's guilt was pinned on him. He wouldn't give up now. Before leaving, he went to say goodbye to Dorothy. She gave him tea with honey, pressed a jar of that same honey into his hands. Take it, there's more," she said, and walked him out onto the porch. "Come back," she said simply. "You're not a stranger anymore. The house is yours. I'll watch it while you're gone, and you come back. At least for the summer. It's good for the child here." He promised, and he knew he would keep that promise. It was inevitable. It was real. This house, this village, this strange, strict woman who had protected his inheritance for 15 years, all of it had become part of his life. You couldn't cut it off. You could only carry it with you. Alice said goodbye to Tommy carefully and at length. They exchanged important things: stones, strings, secrets. They agreed to write to each other, even though neither of them had a phone. "I'll ask Grandma. She'll write," Tommy said seriously. "And you write too, about the city. I'm curious." Olivia stood nearby, smiling. "Come back in the summer," she said to Benjamin. "Tommy's mother will bring him for the whole summer too. Alice will have company." He nodded. She would. Definitely. Rusty walked them to the car, sat by the fence, and watched them leave. Alice cried out the back window. "I'll come back," she shouted to the cat. "Wait for me." Rusty, of course, didn't answer. He just sat there, staring with his yellow eyes until the car disappeared around the bend. The road back felt shorter, maybe because he knew where he was going, knew what was waiting for him, the job he hadn't lost, colleagues who had stood up for him, a life that went on. Alice fell asleep, hugging her bunny and the little bag of secrets from Tommy. Benjamin drove and thought about how strangely life works. 3 weeks ago, he had been destroyed, broken, cast out. Now he was driving home, cleared and free. And something had changed inside, not outside. Out there, everything had gone back to normal. Inside was different. He understood something important during those 3 weeks in Maplewood. Something you couldn't grasp in the city, among noise and hurry. That the world doesn't rest on congressmen and judges, not on journalists and lawyers. The world rests on people who keep their promises, who look after other people's houses and graves, who bring eggs and milk to strangers' children, who fix wiring without taking money. That is what's real. Everything else is just noise. The city greeted him with traffic jams, horns, and the smell of exhaust. After the village air, it was a physical feeling. Heaviness, stuffiness, something wrong. Alice woke up and wrinkled her nose. "Ugh, it stinks," he laughed. "You'll get used to it. We live here, remember?" They pulled up to their building and went up to the apartment. Dust on the shelves he hadn't cleaned before leaving. An empty fridge. Stale, unused air. Alice walked through the rooms, touched her toys, looked out the window at the yard where empty swings swayed. "Daddy," she said seriously, "can we live in 2 houses? Here and there?" He crouched down beside her. "We can. That's what we'll do. Summer's there, the rest of the time here. Deal?" She nodded. A smile appeared on her face, the first since they had left Maplewood. He went back to work 3 days later. The hospital corridors felt different, or maybe he was different and saw them that way now. Colleagues greeted him, clapped him on the shoulder, said encouraging things. The chief physician, Simon, the same one who had thrown the newspaper at him a month earlier, now shook his hand with both of his, looking him in the eyes with awkward, guilty warmth. "Benjamin, I'm glad you're back. We all are. I'm sorry it turned out this way. We all should have." Benjamin stopped him. "No, you're not to blame. No one is, except Caldwell." Simon nodded, agreed, but there was still a shadow in his eyes. He knew he was at fault, that he had been afraid, that he hadn't stood up for Benjamin when it mattered. That was his burden, not Benjamin's. Let him carry it. The first surgery after the break was routine, uncomplicated, appendicitis in a teenager. Benjamin stood at the table, and his hands remembered everything. Incision, clamps, sutures. His body worked on its own, and his mind felt strangely empty and light, as if he had come home. Not to the apartment, not to the city, to this place, the operating room. Here he was needed. Here he knew how to do something very few people could. Here he saved lives. That evening, he finally called his mother-in-law. Margaret answered on the third ring, her voice cold with anger. "So, you finally showed up. Kidnapper. Where is my granddaughter?" He didn't argue, calmly explained that Alice was in kindergarten, that she was fine. They had gone away to rest because the city had been unsafe. Of course, his mother-in-law already knew about the newspapers and the acquittal. She followed the news more closely than any journalist. But that didn't make her softer. "You took the child without my consent. I have the right—" "You have the right to see your granddaughter," he interrupted. "I've never denied you that. But decisions about her are made by me. I'm her father. If you want, come on Saturday. Alice will be happy. If you don't, that's your choice." She went quiet. She wasn't used to him speaking like that. Before, he had given in, smoothed things over. Helen had asked him not to fight with her mother, and he hadn't. But Helen was gone, and he wasn't going to pretend anymore. "Saturday," his mother-in-law finally said and hung up. He exhaled. A small victory, but an important one. Life settled into a rhythm. Work, kindergarten, dinners for two, bedtime books. Alice told stories at kindergarten about the village, about Tommy, about Rusty, about the goat Betty. The teachers listened with smiles, the other kids with envy. "We're going to the sea this summer," someone bragged. "And we're going to the village," Alice replied proudly. "It's better there. There are chickens and a river." Benjamin picked her up in the evenings, listened to these stories, and felt something warm stir in his chest. She remembered. She carried it with her. Maplewood had become part of her, just as it had become part of him. In December, snow fell, real city snow, dirty and slushy, but still snow. Alice remembered her tiny snowman on the porch of her grandfather's house. "Daddy, do you think he came back, when the snow fell there?" He smiled. "Of course he did. Dorothy is watching. She'd tell us if something happened." He wasn't lying. Dorothy called once a week, giving updates. Rusty had settled in for good, slept on the stove, caught mice. Old William had been sick, but recovered. The store had started selling fresh bread, so there was no need to drive to the nearby town. Small news from a small place, but he listened carefully. It was his parallel life, the one that waited. Just before Christmas, something unexpected happened. Benjamin got a call from the Department of Health. A polite female voice informed him that he had been nominated for a state award, a medal for service to public health. For many years of impeccable work and resilience shown in a difficult situation, he listened and didn't understand. What award? For what? He had just done his job, just hadn't broken when they tried to break him. Was that an achievement? He accepted it. Not for himself, but for those who had stood up for him. For Alice, who would one day learn this story. For his grandfather, who was probably watching from somewhere. The ceremony was modest. A small office, 5 people, a photographer. The minister shook his hand, said the required words. Benjamin said his. Then he stepped outside, holding a red box with the medal, and realized he felt nothing special. No pride, no joy, only tiredness. And a desire to go home, to Alice, to dinner, to a bedtime book. That was the real reward. Not the medal, the life that went on. His mother-in-law came on Saturday, as agreed. She brought a doll, expensive, with lots of outfits. Alice thanked her politely, but it was clear the doll didn't impress her. She was used to other toys, sticks, stones, cats. Margaret sat on the edge of a chair, looking around with an evaluating gaze. She noticed the dust on the shelves, the mess in the corner, the worn carpet. Benjamin didn't make excuses. Yes, not perfect. Yes, a man's version of order. But Alice was fed, dressed, healthy, happy. What else was needed? "I think you need help," his mother-in-law finally said. "A nanny or a housekeeper. I could pay for it." He shook his head. "Thank you. We're managing." She pressed her lips together but didn't argue. Something had changed in their relationship. He no longer bent, and she felt it. Probably didn't understand where it came from, how he dared. But she felt it. And it was the beginning of something new. Not friendship. No. But maybe respect. By spring, he felt ready. Ready for something more. For living, not just surviving. One day at the hospital, he noticed a new nurse, young, tall, with short hair and laughing eyes. She worked in intensive care, and he saw her in passing when he picked up patients after surgery. Her name was Katie. She laughed easily, wasn't shy, joked with orderlies and doctors alike. One day, he accidentally bumped into her at the coffee machine. The machine swallowed coins but refused to give coffee, and Katie was quietly swearing at it, pounding the buttons. Benjamin walked over and knocked on the side, an old trick he remembered from residency. The machine shuddered and spat out a cup. "Wizard," Katie said, looking up at him. "And here I thought surgeons only knew how to cut." He wanted to be offended, but for some reason he laughed. She laughed too. And it was strange to laugh with a stranger by a coffee machine after everything that had happened. Strange, but good. They started greeting each other, then exchanging a few words. Then he learned that Katie had moved from Seattle a year ago, that she lived alone, that she was allergic to lilies and loved long walks. She learned that he had a 6-year-old daughter, that he was a widower, that he liked fishing, even though he hadn't gone in years. "Then go fishing," she said simply. "What's stopping you?" He thought about it and found no answer. Nothing was stopping him. He had just forgotten that he was allowed to want something for himself. Not for Alice, not for work, for himself. In May, he called Dorothy and said he'd come in June, for the whole summer. "Thank God," she replied. "Rusty's been missing you terribly. And Alice, Tommy's been driving his grandma crazy with questions. When are they coming? When?" He hung up and went to Alice. She was drawing at the table, tongue sticking out in concentration. "Sweetheart, remember I promised? We're going to Maplewood." "All summer." She looked up, and a smile spread across her face slowly, like sunshine. "Really? For real? Really?" "For real." She jumped up, threw herself at him, hugged him tight. "Daddy, I've been waiting so long. Rusty remembers me, right? And Tommy? And Dorothy?" He hugged her back, and something tightened in his throat. 3 weeks of rescue, now a whole summer, and then many more years after that. He knew it. They arrived in Maplewood in early June, when everything was blooming and smelled so strong it made your head spin. Rusty met them on the porch, fat, ginger, satisfied. Alice squealed, kissed him on the nose, carried him around. The cat endured it with dignity. Dorothy hugged them both, smelling of bread and herbs. "Welcome back. I baked pies for you, and fresh milk. Betty missed you." Tommy came running an hour later, as soon as he heard they were there. Alice and he hugged like they hadn't seen each other in 100 years, then immediately ran off to the river, to build a shelter, catch frogs, do everything kids are supposed to do in a village summer. Benjamin sat on the porch, watching them go, and the world felt simple. Not easy. Simple. Clear. Right. There was no Caldwell here, no journalists, no mother-in-law with her demands, no sleepless nights and fear. There was sun, a river, a cat on his lap, distant children's laughter. That was enough. That evening he took out a fishing rod, his grandfather's, old but still solid. went to the river, cast the line, sat on the bank, and time stopped. The water murmured, mosquitoes hummed, the sun set slowly and beautifully, painting the sky in colors you never see in the city. He caught nothing. He didn't need to. He just sat, just breathed, just lived. That night he dreamed of Helen. She stood in the doorway of the house, smiling. "You're doing everything right," she said. "I knew you'd manage." He wanted to step closer, to hug her, but woke up to the rooster, as usual. Lay there, staring at the ceiling. No, it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory. And it didn't hurt. For the first time in 3 years, it didn't hurt. She would have been happy. For him and Alice. For this house, this life. She didn't get to see it, but she would have understood. By midsummer, Alice was deeply tanned, learned to swim. Tommy taught her, with old William watching, and completely refused to wear shoes. Why? It's soft here. The logic was solid. Benjamin himself walked around in old sandals and understood her. He learned to bake bread. Dorothy showed him patiently, step by step, like Grandma once had. The first loaf came out crooked and bland, but edible. The fifth was almost real. Alice was proud of him as if he had built a rocket. "My dad is a baker, and a doctor, and a fisherman. He can do everything." He laughed and didn't argue. Let her think he could do everything. It's good for kids to believe in their fathers. One evening, he stepped out onto the porch and saw an unfamiliar woman by the gate. She stood there, not daring to come in, looking at the house in a strange, hungry way, as if trying to memorize every detail. Her face seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Then she looked up, saw him, and froze. "Benjamin?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. He stepped closer. Now he recognized not the face, but the eyes. Eyes he saw every day, in the mirror, in Alice, his mother. The woman nodded. She had aged, badly, more than 15 years should have done. Gray hair, a wrinkled face, but her posture was still straight, just as he remembered. "May I come in?" she asked. He didn't know what to say. His mother had left when he was 13, just walked out, for some man, into another life. Left him with his father, who drank. His grandparents took him in, raised him, set him on his feet. He tried not to think about his mother. And now she was standing here, by his grandfather's house, after all these years. "Come in," he finally said. "There's tea." They sat in the kitchen, and the silence was thick, awkward. Alice, thankfully, had run off to Tommy and didn't see her. He didn't know how to explain a grandmother who had never existed and suddenly appeared. His mother spoke slowly, choosing her words. "I know I don't have the right. I know I'm late. But I wanted to see you, to know how you are, how my granddaughter is. Dorothy wrote to me when you came in the fall. I didn't dare come. I thought, why? So many years have passed, and then I realized I might die without ever asking for forgiveness." He was silent. What was there to say? That he forgave her? He hadn't. That he was glad to see her? No. That he hated her? No, that wasn't true either. Just emptiness. Where feelings for a mother should have been. Emptiness. "I don't know what to tell you," he finally said. "Honestly, I don't. I was 13. You left. My father drank himself to death 3 years later. If not for my grandparents, who knows what would have happened to me. You didn't come to their funerals. You didn't call. You didn't write. And now, you're here. Why?" His mother stared at the table. Her hands were trembling. "I was a coward," she said quietly. "I was afraid. First, that you wouldn't accept me. Then, that it was already too late. Then, that I'd die without ever trying. It's not an excuse, just an explanation. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. I thought about you every day, every single day, all these years." He didn't know if it was true. He couldn't check. But for some reason, he believed her. Maybe because he wanted to. Maybe because he was tired of carrying that stone, an old childhood hurt. Maybe because Maplewood had taught him something important. Life is too short for unforgiveness. He didn't forgive her that evening, or the next. But he let her stay in the next room, in the house she once knew, when she came here as a young wife with a young husband. Alice accepted the grandmother's appearance with childlike ease. So this is Grandma Vera, the one I never saw? Cool. Children don't know the past. For them, only now exists. And now there was a grandmother who told funny stories and knew how to weave dandelion wreaths. That was enough. His mother stayed for a week, helped around the house, cooked. It turned out she could cook. She just hadn't shown it in his childhood, or he didn't remember. She walked with Alice when he went fishing. They talked little, but even the silence changed, became lighter. Before leaving, she came up to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, "for not chasing me away, for giving me a chance. I'm not asking for more. If you want, call me. If you don't, I'll understand." He nodded. She left. And strangely enough, after she was gone, something loosened. Some knot inside him, one he hadn't even noticed, came undone. He hadn't forgiven her, but he had stopped holding on to the resentment. And maybe that was the beginning of forgiveness. August was coming to an end. Time to go back to the city. Alice cried. "I don't want to. It's nice here. There it's boring." He hugged her, promised they'd come back for fall break, and winter, and next summer. "This is our home now, sweetheart. We're not going anywhere." Dorothy packed jars for the road, jam, pickles, tomatoes, honey. Take it, take it. In the city, everything's store-bought, fake. This is real. Alice needs to grow." Rusty walked them to the gate and stayed there, sitting, just like in the fall. But this time, Alice didn't cry. "I'll be back," she said seriously to the cat. "Wait." The city welcomed them back, noisy, dusty, always in a rush. But now it didn't press down on him. Benjamin knew there was a place where everything was different, a place he could return to. That changed everything. At work, he was greeted with smiles, tanned, rested, looking younger. He really did feel younger. His back didn't ache, his head didn't buzz, his sleep was deep and free of nightmares. The village healed things no medicine ever could. Katie met him in the hallway, still just as cheerful, her haircut a bit shorter now, a light tan across her nose. "Oh, the country boy is back. Catch any fish?" He laughed. "A little. Want me to treat you?" She looked at him closely. "Is that an invitation?" He realized it was, and that he wanted it to be. "Let's have dinner," he said. "Friday. I know a place that serves real country food." She smiled. "Let's." Dinner was in a small restaurant with soup and pies, noisy and smelling like home. Katie talked about her grandmother, who kept a cow and made cottage cheese, about her father, who worked his whole life at a factory, about her mother, who taught her not to be afraid of difficulties. He listened and thought, this is her, a normal woman, simple, real, no games, no masks, the kind he would have looked for if he had been looking. And he hadn't been. Yet he found her anyway. After dinner, he walked her home, and at the entrance, she stopped. "It was good," she said. "Do it again?" He nodded. "We will." She kissed him quickly on the cheek and disappeared inside. He stood there watching her go, warmth spreading inside him. That fall, they went to Maplewood together, the three of them, him, Alice, and Katie. He was nervous like a fool on a first date. What if Alice didn't like her? What if Dorothy didn't accept her? What if Katie herself got scared of the remoteness, the stove heating, the lack of signal? He worried for nothing. Alice accepted Katie instantly. She had a gift with children. Within an hour, they were feeding chickens together. 2 hours later, they were baking cookies from leftover dough. Dorothy watched them and nodded approvingly. A good girl, good hands, knows what she's doing. That was the highest praise. Rusty showed up in the evening, sniffed Katie, sneezed, and curled up in her lap. Approved. Winter passed gently. Work, home, Alice, Katie. They didn't rush, didn't make plans. They were just together, and that was enough. For Christmas, he gave her tickets south, to rest, to warm up. She gave him a thick fishing book, full of diagrams and pictures. So you'll fish properly in the summer. They laughed, drank champagne, and Alice fell asleep on the couch, hugging her bunny and a new plush Rusty, a gift from Katie. In spring, he proposed. Not in a restaurant, not with a ring and a glass, just at home in the evening when Alice was already asleep. He said, "Marry me." Katie stayed silent for so long he got scared. Then she said, "Yes." And everything fell into place. They had the wedding in Maplewood that summer. Small, family style. Dorothy baked pies. Old William caught fish for the table. Olivia decorated the yard with flowers. Alice and Tommy ran around with Rusty, who, for the occasion, wore a bow on his neck and endured it with dignity. His mother came too. She stayed to the side, didn't interfere, but she was there. His mother-in-law didn't come. Margaret still hadn't accepted that he married some nurse, but that was her choice. He no longer fought with her. He just lived his life. Toward evening, when the guests had left and Alice was asleep on Grandma's bed, he led Katie out onto the porch. The sun was setting over Blackwater, the sky burning orange and pink, so beautiful it felt unreal. "Are you happy?" he asked. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Very. And you?" He thought about a year ago. The newspapers, the investigation, the fear, the escape, the house that waited, the people who protected it, the daughter who blossomed here, the woman who became his wife, the mother he had begun to forgive. "Yes," he said, "I'm happy." Rusty came out onto the porch, rubbed against his legs, then hers, sat down beside them and stared at the sunset with his yellow eyes. Somewhere in the village, a dog was barking. Somewhere, a rooster crowed, even though it was already evening. His clock must have been off. It smelled of the river, hay, and, for some reason, pies, probably a breeze from the kitchen. Everything was right. Everything was in its place. He hugged Katie tighter. The sunset faded. Life went on. A year later, they had a son. They named him Michael, after his grandfather, the one who built boats and saved villages from fires. Alice welcomed her brother with a joy Benjamin hadn't expected. He had feared jealousy, tantrums, but none of that happened. She leaned over the crib, looked at the tiny red face and whispered, "Michael, I'll teach you how to catch frogs, and I'll show you Rusty. You'll like him." Katie laughed, Benjamin smiled, and life felt so full that sometimes he woke up at night and lay there, listening to his wife's breathing, to his son's soft snuffling in the crib, to Alice's quiet murmuring in her sleep. She was talking to someone, probably Tommy or Rusty, and couldn't believe it was all his. Real, not a dream. Now they went to Maplewood as a whole family. Him, Katie, Alice, little Michael. Dorothy welcomed them like her own, fussed over them, complained that Katie was too thin, that she needed to eat more, that she wouldn't have enough milk, and pushed cookies, cottage cheese, and fresh milk from Betty into her hands. Katie didn't take offense. She simply couldn't be offended by Dorothy. She was one of those people you couldn't help but love, even when they scolded and bossed you around. Rusty accepted the new family member with dignity, sniffed the crib, sneezed, then lay down beside it to guard. When Michael cried, and he cried often, loudly with character, the cat looked at him reproachfully, but didn't leave. He stood watch. The house grew. Not literally, the walls stayed the same, but inside, there was more life. Benjamin added a veranda on Grandma's side, where you could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Katie planted flower beds under the windows, asters, dahlias, phlox, everything that blooms for a long time and smells sweet. Alice hung a swing from the apple tree. Theodore helped, welded a frame from iron pipes, and said it couldn't be sturdier. Michael grew up, learned to crawl, then to walk, then to run, and he ran straight after Alice like a little tail, never falling behind. She was patient. Sometimes she grumbled, "Michael, come on, wait, I'll be quick." But she never chased him away. He was her brother, her responsibility. She felt that. Work in the city went on, but it was no longer his whole life. He operated, saved people, healed, and came home, where he was expected. That changed everything. Before, after a hard surgery, after a patient lost, he would lie awake at night, replaying every move, every decision. Now Katie would hold him, and it became easier. Not simpler, easier. The pain didn't disappear, but it could be carried when someone was there beside him. One day, Michael was already 3, a woman was brought into the hospital after a car accident. Severe abdominal trauma, internal bleeding, minutes mattered. Benjamin operated for 4 hours. She survived. Later, when she came to, she asked to see the doctor who had saved her. He came into the room and recognized her. A journalist, the same one who had stood by his building with a camera 3 years earlier. The same one who wrote about the killer surgeon, the one whose face he remembered because she had looked at him with such greedy excitement, like she had caught a criminal. Now she lay on a hospital bed, pale, with an IV, and looked at him with completely different eyes. "You recognized me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I wanted to apologize. I've wanted to for a long time, but I didn't know how. Back then it was my first big story. The editor pushed. Caldwell paid. I didn't think this was a real person. With a family, with a child. To me it was material, a headline, ratings. I left journalism later. After everything came out, I couldn't do it anymore." Benjamin was silent. He didn't know what to say. Hatred? It wasn't there. Anger? That wasn't there either. Just tiredness. And a strange, misplaced compassion for this woman who had almost destroyed his life and now lay here, saved by his hands. "I forgive you," he finally said. "Not for you. For myself. I don't need this burden." She began to cry. He left the room and went home, thinking the whole way about how strangely life is arranged, how it brings people together, pulls them apart, brings them together again, how nothing is accidental. That evening, when Katie put Michael to bed and sat beside him on the porch, he told her about the journalist, about recognizing her, about the surgery, about her apology. "And you forgave her?" Katie asked. "I did." She took his hand. "Was it hard?" He thought about it. No, it wasn't hard. Strange, yes. Unexpected, yes. But not hard. "You know," he said slowly, choosing his words, "if not for that whole story, if not for Caldwell, the journalists, the escape, we wouldn't have gone to Maplewood. I wouldn't have remembered the house. I wouldn't have stopped. I'd still be living that life. Surgeries, clinic, an empty apartment. Alice would have grown up with my mother-in-law. I would have turned into a machine that only works." Katie listened silently. "And now?" He gestured toward the yard, the house, the garden behind it. "Now we have this. Alice has this. Michael will have a childhood I barely had after my parents died. We found a home. A real home." "You think none of it was for nothing?" Katie pressed against his shoulder. "I don't think so. I know." He paused. "Back then it felt like the end of the world. Career destroyed, life broken, everyone against me. But it was a turn. Maybe the only way to knock me out of the rut I was stuck in." The universe, or God, whatever you call it, hit me hard, painfully, but otherwise I wouldn't have moved. Do you regret it? He looked at her smart eyes, her short haircut, the smile at the corner of her lips. Then at the window, where the nightlight glowed in the children's room. At the house, filled with photos of their life together. At the garden he and Katie had planted with their own hands. I regret that it hurt, that Alice had to go through fear, that my mother worried so much, he sighed. But the outcome? No, I don't regret it, because I gained more than I lost. I gained you. I gained Michael. I gained a place where I can breathe. I gained my real self, not the one I was trying to be. Katie was silent, and he felt her tears falling onto his hand. What? He asked, worried. Nothing. I love you so much. And I'm so glad you understand this. Some people live their whole lives and never understand why they were given trials. And you did. He hugged her tighter. Somewhere in the house, Michael stirred in his sleep. Rusty slipped out from under the porch, stretched, and jumped onto their laps. The stars over Maplewood shone brighter than they ever did over the city. Yes, Benjamin thought, falling asleep that night beside Katie. Yes, none of it was for nothing. Every pain, every fear, every loss led him here. To this house, to these people, to this life. And if someone offered him the chance to go back and change that fateful day when the congressman's son ended up on his operating table, he would refuse. Because then, none of this would exist. And this was priceless. 5 years passed. Benjamin stood on the porch of the house in Maplewood, the same one he inherited from his grandfather, the one that saved him when it felt like there was no salvation. Alice, now a teenager, was helping Dorothy in the garden. Michael was racing around the yard with the ginger cat. Katie was baking pies on the same stove where little Benjamin once warmed himself. He looked at it all, the house, the family, the river beyond the trees, and understood. He was home. Not in a geographical sense, but in the real one. Where you are accepted as you are. Where you don't have to be perfect. Where you can simply be. Life turned out to be more generous than he could have imagined on that terrible day when he fled the city with his daughter and a single backpack. It took a lot, but gave back far more.